All right, everybody, thanks for joining. Let's go ahead and get started. Thank you and welcome to our weekly 30-minute webinar. My name is Dan Schmidt, a systems and sales engineer here at Variphy, and I'll be your host in today's webinar. We're joined today with Victor Verba, another systems engineer here at Variphy. And in today's webinar, we're going to be covering ways to use our Cradle-to-Grave feature within the Call Analytics tool to successfully track calls routing through your Unity voice messaging system. So quick agenda for today's session. We're going to get started off with a quick overview of our company and what we do. We'll then jump into a live demo where Victor will guide us through ways to use call analytics to help track calls through Unity input options. We'll pause then for some Q&A to get some of your questions answered. If during the demo you have any sort of questions, please be sure to apply those questions to the Q&A panel within the WebEx and not the chat panel, so those don't get missed by our panelists. After Q&A, we'll reward one lucky winner a $50 Amazon gift card, so hang around. All right, so quick overview of Variphy. Variphy is the preferred analytics and management solution for Cisco Collaboration. We provide industry-leading CDR reporting and call analytics, customizable dashboards and widgets, UCCX reporting, remote phone control, change management. In today's session, we're going to be covering methods within the call analytics module to successfully see calls routing through the Unity voice messaging system. If you have any other questions on any of the other features or modules that we offer, we can certainly take those offline and get those answered for you. Before we do get started in today's session, another announcement, would like to announce that Variphy does now offer a new service that provides managed consulting services to our customers. Our Variphy SE team will be engaged on a one-on-one basis to remotely provide additional consulting, unassisted reporting, dashboard configurations, and system monitoring. This is a service that provides a dedicated Variphy SE to do the daily heavy lifting of report creation and generation. So if you have any interest whatsoever in this new offering, please do let us know, and we'd be glad to talk more in depth on this new product. So let's go ahead and get straight into the demo where Vic will get us started. Vic, let me pass the ball over to you.
Excellent. Thank you, Dan. All right. Hey, everybody. I want to thank everybody for attending our webinar today. Today, what we're going to look at is something that we see pretty commonly. And one of the questions that it's often asked is, hey, can Variphy connect to my Unity and pull out information like, who's hitting what options? I want to know, if people are going to, certain departments or certain options or using the self-help option or anything like that. So Variphy does not connect directly to your Unity system for the purpose of reviewing, option pushes or how many voicemails somebody has or anything like that. But what we do have the flexibility to do is to be able to develop reports around cradle-to-grave scenarios on what happens as a result of those options being pushed. So, a perfect example is, let's say I call into your company and, I hit the main route point, which routes me into your Unity system. From there, I have several options. Some of them may be self-help, or I can press 2 to get over to a sales department, or I can press 3 to get over to an IT or a help desk department. So we don't see what options they push, but what we do see is the result of that option. So let's say, for example, I press option 1 and it routes me over to a particular hunt group that's going to take me to a group of users. So what we can do with our Cradle-to-Grave is actually pull out the information that was pushed as a result of Unity and then formulate those option presses based off of the result of the option. So it's a couple different ways we're going to do this, so let's go ahead and jump right into it. So the first thing I'm going to pop over to is our call analytics section over here. And first thing we need to do is we really need to identify, well, what's our Unity system? In my case, I know it's extension 8000. So I'm going to go ahead and just do a very blanket search for all calls going to Unity, and we're going to take a look at that data. So this is probably going to be a little bit more data than I want, because this is really going to be everybody going to Unity. So if I pick up my extension and try to call the voice messaging server to retrieve a message or something like that, I'm still going over to the Unity system. So this is going to give us a little bit more data than we want, but it is important because we do need to identify what that Unity option is. That could be something as simple as a terminating device name. In other words, I know this is my Unity gateway. So anytime somebody hits this particular device, they're going into my Unity system. I also know that it's 8,000. Depending on how your call manager is set up, it could also be a voice type. So in other words, if you don't know the extension, you may be able to come in and choose voicemail port as a device type to show, what your Unity port is. But first step first is, identifying what that voice messaging port is. So in my case, it's 8,000. Now, you'll notice I got a lot of information here, some internal calls. I don't need all those internal calls. I'm not looking for the internal information. I really want to just see the inbound calls to my voice messaging system. So we need to do a little filtering first. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to isolate, how do we know we're just getting inbound calls? Million different ways to be able to do that. I could say anything that comes from a phone number over 8 digits. That's going to be an inbound call for me. In my case, I'm going to go ahead and use the originating device type or originating device name to isolate all my inbound calls. So for that, I'm going to go ahead and just pick originating device name. I'm going to add a filter and paste that guy in there. And now what I'm doing is I'm going to go ahead and tell the system I only want to see calls that went to my Unity system from my primary gateway. And I'm going to make sure I check mark this guy, because he's the difference of an and or statement. He's letting my search know that any record I bring back has to meet both of this criteria. If this guy were unchecked, it's going to bring back every call that went to 8,000, but it's also going to go ahead and bring back every inbound call, regardless if it was to voicemail or not. So we're going to go ahead and filter these guys down a little bit. And the first thing we're going to go ahead and start off with is somewhat of a simpler report. Depending on your environment, there's a lot of different things that could happen. Calls can pop off to third-party systems. They could go to, in my case, a call center. They could go to hunt groups. So each environment is different. One of the things that we're often asked is, hey, do you have a canned report that can do this? The long and short of it is no, because not every environment's going to go ahead and fit this bill. And I'm going to go ahead and give us an example of just a very general, simple environment that maybe just uses hunt groups, doesn't really have any third-party systems, and this could be sometimes the easy button. So what we're looking at here are all calls from my gateways into my Unity system. Now, you'll notice what I'm searching for is the Unity system, so I don't necessarily see what's happening after the calls get into this Unity system. So for that, we have to rely on what's called Cradle-to-Grave. So by toggling this guy on here, it's going to allow me to see what happens after or before my search. And you'll notice I'm using the HTML format. Anytime I'm including detail or something with a lot of columns, I personally prefer the HTML format. It allows me to expand the page. Excel and CSV will do the same thing. PDF has a tendency to kind of cut things off when the columns get too long. So like I said, just rule of thumb, anytime you're using something with a lot of detail or a lot of columns, these three guys over here are just my personal preference. So now I'm running this report with Cradle-to-Grave. We're going to take a look at some of the options. So what it's doing right now is it's taking my search criteria, which is any call coming into my gateway and hitting my Unity system, and it's looking above and beyond my search. So it's now pulling back all of the calls and the sequences of events that took place for those calls. And that's what we're going to utilize to determine those Unity options. Because again, we don't just get to see, hey, option 1 was pressed, but we do get to see the result of option 1 being pressed. So in a lot of these cases, just looking through this data very generally, the first thing I could see here is call comes in over my SIP gateway. They hit my main number. So they're hitting 7100. I know that 7100 is my main number or a route point to my main number. You guys may have different route points. This is another great thing to be able to filter in off of as well to help diagnose, hey, who's calling what particular numbers before they're getting to my Unity system. But in this case, I can see they go into Unity. I also see these cause codes. So I know that these calls are terminating in Unity, and I do not have any related legs, which means they're not going anywhere else. So one thing about just looking at this just preliminarily, I could see I have some self-help. So maybe option number 5 or option number 6 is self-help, and that's something that we're going to want to go ahead and hone in on. How many people are using that self-help? But what I want to go ahead and get into a little bit are these guys here. So these are the calls that are going to have cradle-to-grave associated to them. In other words, call comes in, they hit some options, and in this case, they're rolling out to a UCCX. I could tell they're rolling out to a UCCX because I could see the terminating device name. I could see some device descriptions. Maybe it's just, this is a UCCX script. So I know that they're hitting UCCX, and the nice thing about that is it gives me something to key off of. How many callers, maybe my option number 1 or my option number 2 says, press number 2 to get over to my call center, or press option number 3 to get over to my rentals department. The nice thing about this cradle-to-grave is we're going to be able to filter in on all of that information. But before we jump into that, let me go ahead and show you something that doesn't necessarily route out to a secondary system. And this may be an easy option for a lot of folks out there. So within the call data, we have something called last redirect DN. So I'm going to go ahead and add that in here. And what this can do in general environments is allow you to actually see those Unity calls as they kind of came in. So go ahead and filter out some of this. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to filter in on that last redirect DN being my Unity port. All right. So when a call comes in from Unity in its basic format, what it's going to go ahead and do is Unity is basically, they're going to hit their options and they're going to route somewhere. That last redirect DN is going to tell you where that call was last redirected from. In this case, and in a lot of cases, it's the voicemail port. So now what I'm doing is rather than focusing in on just that leg that came into Unity, I'm focusing in on the subsequent legs that went to Unity. In other words, the result of that Unity. So what we're going to see here are basically a list of calls that all got answered but were redirected from the Unity voice messaging system. And in my case, in a very common case, each one of these are individual hunt groups. And what we can take a look at is that last redirect over here is 8,000. And if I go ahead and export this in Cradle-to-Grave, what we're going to go ahead and see is that all of these calls came from my Unity system. They hit a particular option, be it 1, 2, 3, or 4, and they redirected to a particular department or end user or organization based on going through a hunt group. So what we're going to run here real quickly is just a very basic report that's going to show us what departments people are coming to based off of Unity. And just to give you an example, so here's the call that I was focusing in on before, but now that I'm focusing in on this last redirect right here of my Unity messaging port, I can see all the calls coming in, who they're going to, and what departments they're going to. The nice thing about that is now I don't even, for this particular type of report, I don't even necessarily have to focus in on the cradle-to-grave because my Unity port is the last redirect. So I can very simply export a report, group this guy by my terminating departments or where those calls are resulting. And what we're going to see here is a very, very simple report that's going to go ahead and tell me how many calls are going to each one of those departments. Each one of those departments, for many customers, are identifiable to an option being pressed. And that's going to go ahead and very easily be able to give you that general report. But we're not here for the easy report. We're here for the harder report because this doesn't always fit into every environment. And that's one of the reasons that we don't have a lot of canned reports because everybody's environment does something a little bit different. So we need to be able to bend and fluctuate with each customer's environment, and that's where Cradle-to-Grave comes in. So just looking at this simple report, I'm focusing in on that last redirect DN of my Unity port. I just chose to group this by all of the departments that receive those calls. And you know what? If this were option 1, option 2, option 3, in this particular environment for this case, it was very easy for me to just create a report that really laid out the options. So that's one way of being able to run these reports, and I urge you to give that option a try. It is a great way to be able to quickly do a lot of option type reporting if you have a setup that is simpler and doesn't route out to a lot of third party. So what we're here for, though, is to get a little bit more into the weeds. We need to pull out some of these calling scenarios, and we need to do it through cradle to grave, because you'll notice a lot of these calls are not going to have a last redirect DN of 8,000 because they're actually routing into call centers, or they're routing through various different pieces of my call manager, be it route points, calls being not answered, and things like that. So for this, we're going to go ahead and get a little bit further into the weeds. So I'm going to go back to my original search, and we're going to pull back all of the calls going to my 8,000 from the outside world, and we're strictly going to stick with the ones coming from the outside world. So for that, again, I'm just going back to my final called party number being my Unity system, and my originating device name being my SIP trunk. So here it's going to bring back quite a few calls again, but we're going to go ahead and look through that cradle to grave, and we're going to pick out certain calling scenarios, and we're going to build cradle to grave searches around those calling scenarios. So first thing first, let's go ahead and run this report. We're going to export this information, and then we're going to go ahead and look at the options. So right here, when I export this guy, let's get a copy of this report here. Cradle to grave on, HTML format. I'm going to close out these other guys here, and I'm going to show you how to pick out options and then build that into the report. So when we go into cradle to grave, the first thing you're going to see is the option to build cradle to grave search sets. Nice thing about Variphy is, one, we have cradle to grave, so it gives you the ability to visually see how those calls are flowing. But not only is it just pretty to look at, it will also give you the ability to summarize on those options. So let's go ahead and dig right into it. So I'm going to scroll past all of this because I can see that these are a lot of self-help. Calls coming into my Unity system. There's no redirect. A lot of these calls are ending. Oh, you know what? I left my grouping on. Hold on one second. Let me turn this guy off. Yeah, I get my search in there. We're good. So these are a lot of calls. They're coming in. They're basically coming into the Unity system. Self-help. We definitely want to know how many people are able to use the self-help. That's a key metric on identifying if your Unity system is doing what it needs to be doing. You want more people being able to self-help than be able to have to get on the phone with your customer service representatives if they're looking for just general hours or directions or something like that. So we're going to go ahead and build that guy out first. We're going to easily identify those based off of the fact that the calls are coming into my Unity system. They have a normal call clearing. Normal call clearing on a call record, either originating or terminating, means that that's the end of the call. So first thing first, let's go ahead and build a self-help option. So I'm going to export my results. I'm going to go ahead and choose to save this report for the future so we can go back to it, and I'm just going to call it Unity Options. All right. Next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to pop down to the cradle to grave section, and I'm going to enable some cradle to grave searching. So we're going to call this options 1, self-help. All right. So, and where these options fall within your Unity system is really just how you name them. So first thing first, I need to identify all the calls that are terminating in my Unity. How do I know that? One, I'm isolating all the calls to Unity, only the ones from the outside world. So I want to say anything that terminates at 8,000 and has a normal call clearing is going to be a self-help because I know that it didn't go any further. If we look at some of my other calls that went further, what you'll notice is these are not normal call clearing, which means they didn't end there. So first thing first, let's go ahead and say our final called party number is going to go ahead and be 8,000. That's going to be our Unity messaging port. So our next thing we're going to go ahead and isolate is going to be our codes. If I could spell it right there. And that's going to be our originating or terminating cause codes. Now, normally for self-help, you can probably just focus in on originating cause code. But if somebody stays in self-help for a long time and the Unity system disconnects them, you may want to catch that as well. So we're just going to go ahead and focus in on both originating and terminating. And we're going to say normal call clearing. We're going to make sure we check mark this guy. So now what we've done is we've created a search for option number 1, which is self-help. All right. The next thing we want to do is we're going to go ahead and expand on this because there's more than one option. So let's go ahead and look through our cradle to grave. So I'm going to go ahead and just click on one of these guys. We're going to pop down to the first one here. So I can see this call comes in. They go into my Unity messaging system. And in this case, they go to UCCX. So it's important. I want to know how many calls are going to my call center as a whole. And we're also going to get into how to be able to pick out certain types of call center calls and things like that from CDR as well. But first thing first is we need to be able to isolate all the calls that came from my Unity. You can see we're highlighted in orange, all the calls that came from Unity, but then which ones went to call center. So for that, I can very easily say, hey, I want to see out of cradle to grave all of the calls that went into my UCCX. And I can do that by picking on the terminating device name. So let's go ahead and build option number 2. For that, I'm just going to go ahead and add another search. 2 calls to call center. All right, so I'm going to build this one very generic, and I'm just going to say that terminating device name starts with UCCX. So very simple, very straightforward. I'm not getting into the weeds of who answered the call on this report. This report is strictly for what's going on through my Unity system. So now we've created another option. I'm going to isolate all the calls that went into my UCCX. Now, maybe I have option number 3. Let's go ahead and dig down here for option number 3. I know I've got some hunt groups in here, so let's see what we can find. So you know what? Let's go ahead. I know one. Let's go ahead and find it here, and there we are. There we are. So 77280 is one of my hunt groups. That's another option for me. So now I need to build option number 3 to say, hey, I need to know how many calls come into my 77280 hunt group because that's my maintenance option. So let's go ahead and build option number 3. I'm just creating an additional search set here. We'll say option 3 calls to maintenance. Pretty straightforward. We can isolate our calls to maintenance because we know those are going to the hunt group. I can also isolate these based on the department. I can say I need to know from the Unity system because, again, my main search is Unity, so anything in my cradle to grave resulted from somebody getting into my Unity system first. So we can isolate that by department. We can isolate that by a series of extensions, or in this case, I can isolate that over by the hunt group. So here I'm going to say options 3, let's put a hyphen in there so we're uniform. And right there, I'm going to pick on the original called party number. And for my original called party number, I'm going to go ahead and choose the hunt group. Like I said, there's a lot of different things. Maybe I didn't have a hunt group and I just had a series of extensions. Well, then I could just put in a series of extensions and get the same results. In this case, I've got a hunt group when they hit option number 3. So I'm going to come in here, hit 77280. And now what I've done is I've built some Unity options. And I can continue to compound onto all this. I can build as many options as I want in here. It's all a result of what they're doing in Unity. If I wanted to get more specific than just UCCX, well, then I can focus in on the UCCX trigger and say, well, you know, out of Unity, how many people went to 77100, which maybe is a specific trigger for a specific queue. Those are all things that you can add just by adding an additional search set. But now that we have some things in here, let's go ahead and take a look at our report. So you'll notice I'm scrolling down to the bottom here, and I am toggling this guy on. You got to toggle this guy on because this is where your summary is going to come from. So I don't necessarily care about average durations. I don't care about total durations. I really just want to get a count of how many calls are going in, through my Unity system. Call detail, I'm not super concerned with. We'll go ahead and leave it on for this demonstration. But those are all things that you can go ahead and turn off or toggle on if you want to. So let's go ahead and give this guy a run. I turned on what I need. So now we're going to go ahead and take a look at the results of what we did. Again, not being able to see exactly what somebody's pushing doesn't necessarily hinder you from being able to still tell the results of what they push. Now, of course, there's always going to be some type of caveat. If I push option number 1 and I go to extension 1, 2, 3, 4, but I could also push number 2 and go to extension 1, 2, 3, 4. If they both go the exact same way, then of course, Variphy is not going to have a way of being able to say, yes, they pressed option 1 or yes, they pressed option 2 because the calls route the exact same way. However, let's say I press option number 1 and it goes to a particular extension, but it routes through a hunt group first. Well, then if I press option number 2, maybe it goes to a different hunt group, but it could route through the same extension. Well, now I've got something unique. I've got a hunt group that I can focus in on to be able to determine those Unity options. So very quickly, what we're able to see here, there is our total calls into Unity. And if we take a look, we built our options here. I have option number 1, self-help. Out of all those calls that came in, 719 of them went to self-help. Calls to maintenance, 213 calls ended up in my maintenance group via way of hunt group. And 865 of those calls went into my UCCX. Now we can continue to build and make these and refine these and figure out what queues and what scripts they're going to, how many times they're bouncing around and routing around and things like that. There's a lot of flexibility within that cradle to grave to be able to pick out those certain calling scenarios. So with that in mind, I appreciate everybody's time today. I know we are coming to the conclusion, but I hope I've given everybody a little bit of information to be able to kind of look through some of those cradle to graves and see how you could pull out some of the various options and things like that. So everybody have yourselves a great day. Dan, I'm going to go ahead and pass the ball back to you, buddy.
Thanks, Victor. Great job as always. We do have a few questions, Vic. I know you were explaining a little bit about the cause codes and what those mean. So Jack asks, what's the difference between the normal call clearing versus the no error cause code?
That's a great question. So when we see normal call clearing, think of that as the person who hung up the call. So normal call clearing on the originator means that the person calling in or the originator of the call disconnected that call or hung up. So I can see here that this person hung up the call because they're the originating and they have the normal call clearing. So anytime you're looking at that normal call clearing, understand that, you know, where it falls, either terminating or originating, is a great way to see who disconnected a call. In this case, here's a perfect example. This person called in, they went into the voicemail system, and this is kind of the example I talked about a little earlier, where, you know, they just waited out the voicemail system, and eventually the voicemail system just disconnected them. You know, we see that a couple of times. It's also a great way to be able to say, you know, when you have that person that says, I called in and so-and-so hung up on me. Well, using those originating and terminating codes, you're actually able to tell who disconnected that call, because wherever that normal call clearing falls is the person who disconnected that call.
Excellent. Thank you much, Vic, for that. So the other questions from Mohammed. We had kind of a long question here, but let's try to break this down here. So Mohammed is saying that his call flow goes through Unity Call Handler, and like you said, Vic, just like you said, input option actually goes over to Contact Center Express. Is there any way in Variphy to link up the activity within Contact Center Express and outside of Contact Center Express?
Sure. Okay, so I think I understand. So that's kind of a yes and no. From Call Manager is where we get the cradle to grave information. Now, Contact Center Express, it only has Contact Center. So, you know, if a call comes into Contact Center, it goes to a queue. The name of that queue is not going to be produced in the Call Manager or the Cisco data that we're looking at here. That's going to be more of a Contact Center metric. And then let's say it gets answered by an agent and then gets transferred out to somebody outside of the Contact Center. Well, at that point, Contact Center has no idea what's going on, and that's a little bit of where call data and CDR come in. And this example that I have on my screen is actually a really good example, because I could see a call come in and it goes into my Contact Center. Now, I don't get queue, so we don't marry queue names and states and things like that from Contact Center to CDR, but a lot of times we can use these triggers to determine what queues calls are going into. We could see the calls in CDR, again, get answered out of that queue. We get to see who answers them, but we also get to see who transfers them. So if Jen over here is an agent and Pam is not, and maybe she's just part of the organization, has nothing to do with the Contact Center, the nice thing about this is we did marry that Contact Center call, that Contact Center agent, with somebody outside of the Contact Center, and we're able to formulate that all together. The one thing we don't get is that, you know, the agent states and things like that, and the queue names. We can't marry that to Contact Center because there's really just no accurate fields within Contact Center that say, hey, this is going to be the corresponding CDR record.
Yep, excellent point. And I would add to that, Vic, also is the transfer leg where you see the call hitting the port and everything. The duration on that most of the time kind of refers to, well, before call control is needed, that caller is going to be queued, right? And they're waiting for an active agent. So the duration on that specific call leg is a good indication of like their queue time before it gets transferred over to an agent. So yeah, it's kind of before and after, and you get some hints here and there, but like Vic said, right, there's not going to be any queue or state information, right? Because it's all based off of Call Manager CDR, and it's unbeknownst to Call Manager at that point. So.
Yep. Excellent point, Dan. Thank you.
Let's see here. So Just a quick summarization again. So Beth, actually, I think you covered this, but Beth was wondering if I just want to specifically focus in on transferred calls within Cradle-to-Grave, what are the key attributes that they want to key on to find the transferred call in the
Sure.
Cradle-to-Grave sequence?
Sure. So that is a broad question because there's a lot of different things within in call data that you can focus in on. Sometimes it's a matter of being able to use these termination codes, but within call data, I mean, there's a lot. Some of the things. I'll always focus in on, when I start having to look through transfer calls, I'll pick the behalf of codes because they have a lot of information. So, just to give you a quick example, when I'm looking through transfers, let's see if we can find some here. Things like call forward, call transfer, certain devices, certain behalf of reasons. Those are all the things that you're going to look at to focus in on specific transfer legs. But it's something that you kind of have to look through. I would say we did do a Cradle-to-Grave search set webinar. And I'm sure we'll be doing more. And we do talk a little bit about, what fields to add and which fields to look at. So that's always something that you guys can review. And again, like I said, stay in touch with our webinars because we do a lot of the Cradle-to-Grave type reporting. But yeah, to answer the question, Beth, there's a lot of different fields, but I would start with the behalf of codes as well as the termination codes to just start looking at the legs that you're trying to pick out.
Excellent. Great advice, Vic. Yeah, really keying on those cause code values, the call split values. That's a first step to look for. And then, within the Cradle-to-Grave search sets that we kind of hinted at today, and just keying off those really will get you what you're looking for summarization or accounts for those specific call scenarios. So yeah, great question, Beth. That is all the questions we have at this time. Unless anyone else has any other questions, go ahead and submit those in the Q&A panel at this time. Otherwise, you could always reach out to us afterwards. All right, let me go ahead and share out my screen here real quick. That's what we've all been waiting for. Excellent job, Vic. Thank you, as always. Really good information for everyone on today's session. All right, so to announce today's winner, Jeremy Shupik. Thank you for joining today's session. We'll be in touch here with you shortly to see how we can get that $50 Amazon gift card over to you. For everyone else, thank you for your time today, joining our weekly 30-minute webinar. Got a lot of interesting topics coming up, so please visit variphy.com/company/webinars. We basically got another whole month listed out there, so go ahead and register for those. Next week's session is how to, kind of a repeat session, but never more important than today, how to successfully report on your remote workforce due to COVID. So we'll be re-airing that live. So please register and tune in. So once again, thanks everyone for joining. Go out and be safe, and please be nice to one another. We'll see you next week. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, guys.